It did work.
There we are.
There we go. Okay, let's get started. I want to welcome everybody to the fourth 2024 Getting to Zero presentation, sponsored by CFREE. And this has been we've had a wonderful response to the program this year, so I really appreciate the attendance. The presentation today is on demand response presented by Bill O'Connor, who runs the peak demand program for Eversource. But before we introduce him, I want to take a minute to introduce you to CFREE. Let's see if we can get this moving. And of course, it's not working here. Let's see. Hang on. All right. Well, let's see. Let's try this. There we go. CFREE is a working group of the Lincoln Green Energy Committee, and we meet every other week to discuss pertinent things going on in the world of green energy and carbon footprint, and also organizing our activities, which is this program is one of what we do. CFREE serves as a community resource for anybody who's interested in reducing your carbon footprint, and specifically we dedicate a lot of our time to helping residents understand the process, the benefits, and the cost of reducing the footprint of their home. The series kicked off last year, and we had a series of presentations that all focused on retrofitting the home. These are still on our website for anybody who wants to go back and revisit them. The program this year is also being recorded, and we've had a number of presentations already. The next one coming up is heat pumps and ERVs, hot water and more, by Ance Hartman. Today's presentation, as I said, is Bill O'Connor. We're going to dive into your carbon footprint and looking at your food choices, understanding HERS, the challenges of the historical home, and please don't miss our EV show on the 4th of July. And with that, I am going to turn this over to Scott Rodman, who is a key player in our CFREE committee, and Scott will introduce you to Bill O'Connor. Thank you.
Great. Good evening, everyone, and many thanks, Colette. We are very pleased to have Bill O'Connor with us tonight to talk about Eversource's Connected Solutions Demand Response Program. This is an important program, and many thanks to all of you for joining us on Earth Day. I am a big proponent of the demand response programs, and this will be my 5th year as a participant in Eversource's program. I'm particularly excited to see the growth of this segment, with more people coming online with solar arrays and adding batteries. And tonight, Bill will take us through his presentation of the program, and then we'll have time for some questions and answers. If it would be helpful if you would use the chat function to send in questions during Bill's presentation, so we can get those organized to answer them following the presentation. Also, please remember to mute your audio until after Bill's done with his presentation. Bill's background is as a mechanical engineer. He spent 20 years in the building controls business, and for the past 20 years, he has been a leader in the energy efficiency arena, focusing on demand response, energy information systems, and the monitoring of performance. The past 7 years, he has been with Eversource and is currently leading their demand response business in the commercial and residential sectors. With that, we'll turn it over to Bill. Welcome, Bill.
Great. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it. Hope you can hear me okay. Maybe give me a thumbs up. Let me know you can hear me all right. Awesome. Good evening, everybody, and happy Earth Day, and happy Bruins playoffs. Hopefully everyone gets to enjoy some of that too. So we're going to talk about Connected Solutions. Connected Solutions is a Mass Save program. I'm sure you've heard about Mass Save from Scott. Mass Save is an entity that provides incentive dollars for energy efficiency and demand response. That's kind of part of the rates people pay and collect for system benefit charges. So we're going to talk about demand response. So kind of first, what is demand response and why do we do this? So this is a graph of kind of what the ISO New England, which is the Independent System Operator of New England, they're responsible for keeping the electric grid up and running. And as you can imagine, in the summer is when we are currently hitting our electric peaks. And those peaks are in the ballpark of 25,000 megawatts. That's a lot of energy that has to be put out there. And if you look at the top blue line on this graph, you'll kind of notice that 4 or so days a year are when you're actually hitting that peak. So it costs an enormous amount of money to build the infrastructure and the power plants to be able to provide as much energy as you need for those peak days. You need it available. You have to build for it. You have to prepare for it, even though you're only going to use it 1, 2, 3% of the time. And those peaks are happening in the summer. Down the road, we see the potential for winter peaking as we go for a lot of electrification in the area. But right now we're a summer peak and we expect it to stay that way for a while. So we can either build new power plants or we can turn on dirty older power plants, or we can take load off the grid. Those are really your options when you're going to hit those peak days. So if we go to the next slide, we have 2 programs. There's a commercial side of it and a residential side. And in the residential side, we're not going to touch base really on the commercial side, but I'll answer some questions if anyone has them later. What we're trying to do on both sides is really identify when those top peaks are going to happen and call our events to take load off the grid during the high peak days, which is often the 4 to 7 p.m. time frame on those hottest days in the summer. And we can get some benefits as the grid. So reducing that load on the grid during these times. We have 2 programs that look to identify that 1 hour peak in the summer. But then we have another program, a daily program, that's where the batteries come into play to try to take as many of these highest peaks and lower the grid kW at that time. Now, during these programs, last summer, we took about 185 megawatts off the grid, which is a significant amount of energy. We'll dig into that a little bit later. So how does a homeowner participate in these programs? So we have a Wi-Fi thermostat program and a battery storage program. We're going to focus more on the battery storage tonight. I know that's something near and dear to Scott's heart as he's into his 2nd round of those. And the program is called Connected Solutions. So in our Wi-Fi thermostat program, if you've heard of, say, a Nest thermostat, that's one of the popular ones out there. There's another one called Ecobee. Honeywell, a long-time name in thermostats, also is part of the program. So there are a number of thermostats that are Wi-Fi programmable. So you put the thermostat in your home, you're actually connecting it to an app on your phone. So I can log in my phone and I can see what the temperature is. I can make a change. I can change the schedule. So what we're going to do is when we hit these high peak times, we're going to send the signal out to those OEMs, original equipment manufacturers, like Nest, and people that have signed up for this program. We're going to actually automatically adjust their thermostat in their home during the summer. Now, you need to have central air conditioning. Obviously, it wouldn't really apply to window air conditioners. And we're going to call in the order of 15 to 18 events. We're going to give it a little bit of a pre-cooling. So we're going to actually lower the set point for a little bit, maybe 90 minutes, to try to cool the house off a little bit so that when we raise the temperature during the event window, it won't drift too high and make customers uncomfortable. So we have a 4-degree max increase, and it's typically a 3-hour event. And if you get uncomfortable, all you have to do is change the setting on your thermostat to go back to normal, to in effect opt out of the program. On our daily residential battery program, these are going to be discharged again by the OEM. You buy a battery with one of the approved vendors. You enroll it in the program. Scott has done that recently. He has an N-phase battery, and he was just telling me how easy it is right in the application, right in the app on his phone to register and apply for this program. So when we call these events, we signal again that OEM, someone like Tesla, to reach out to their customers and to discharge those batteries. And the OEM is Because this app is connected to the battery, it's reading the information, sending it to the platform we use to run the program. So we tell it to discharge, and it'll discharge the battery over that 3-hour event period. You really won't notice anything in your home because you're using the stored energy in the battery to either take load off the grid by using it in your home, and if you have excess, you can even export out to the grid. So you can take all that load off the grid by discharging your batteries. Now, the summer season is June 1st to the end of September. Very interesting. This past summer, not only was it the lowest system peak, the lowest ISO New England peak in 23 years, but it was the first September peak in 40 years. The peak this past summer was actually September 7th, which is very late in the season. But that's the season, June 1st to September 1st. So for the thermostats, we're going to call those 15 to 18 events, and we're going to give you $50 to enroll per thermostat. So if you have 2 or 3 zones in your house, you could get $100, $150 to enroll those. And then $20 as an annual incentive for being part of this program. And you enroll via your thermostat app. And at the end of the season, we'll send you a gift card that will give you, give you your annual payment to do this. Most of the time, we like to think most of our customers don't even realize this is happening. And again, if you get uncomfortable, you just go to your thermostat and up or down and change your set point, and you've opted out of that event. Now, from a standpoint of how many do we have in here, between the 3 states, Eversource operates in New Hampshire, Mass, and Connecticut, we have 90,000 residential thermostats that are part of this program, which is pretty impressive. And then we have the daily battery dispatch program. This is going to look to call 30 to 60 events per summer. Might sound like a lot, but it's going to be most of the days in August, in July and August, and a few in June or September, if those are going to be peak days, trying to, again, capture those highest number of peaks. They're going to be 2 or 3 hour events. We notify the manufacturer, who automatically, through their connection to your inverter on your battery, tells it when to discharge. And over the average of all these events, we're going to look at your average KW over those events and pay you $275 per KW on average that your battery discharges during these events. And again, you can roll through your battery OEM. If you go to our web pages, eversource.com and residential, and you go into the saving energy and energy efficiency portions of it, you'll see the qualified thermostats. Here we have Nest, Ecobee, Sensi, Honeywell, a popular name. Amazon now has their own smart thermostat that's part of this, and a few others. And you can actually buy them there and get some good incentives. A lot of times these thermostats that might cost $150 at the store, you can actually get for $50 or less with $100 incentive off of these thermostats. And the same goes for the batteries. Here's a list of the different battery vendors, that manufacturers that we work with, that are connected to our platform that runs the system. So when we run one of these events in the summer, it's going to be a peak day, we let all these vendors know, and these vendors reach out to the customers that are enrolled in our program to discharge their batteries at the right time. Let's talk a little bit about how much a KW is. That's a kilowatt. And what gets very confusing sometimes are kilowatt hours versus kilowatts. And so we put this little image together here to kind of relate it. I relate it to a rain barrel full of water. Scott likes to refer to your odometer and your speedometer in your car. But if you think about a rain barrel outside on your gutter, it holds a certain amount of gallons. Let's say it holds 20 gallons. And let's say I have a hose coming out of that, and that hose has a flow rate of 4 gallons per minute. Well, you can kind of tell it would make sense that if I have 4 gallons per minute and 20 gallons available, that's going to drain in 5 minutes. 4 times 5 would be my 20 gallons. It's very similar for batteries. So you have a battery in your house. It's charged typically by your solar panels. A lot of them, I'd say 99% of the batteries for residential are connected to solar systems. It doesn't have to be. You can charge by the grid, but of course, then you'd be paying for that energy, although it would still be beneficial for you. So if you think about the batteries being 24 kilowatt hours worth of energy, and I'm going to discharge it over a 5-hour period at 4 kilowatts per hour, it would take me 5 hours to drain the battery. So the same logic between kilowatts and kilowatt hours. And so your average kilowatts, your average flow during the course of our event, averaged over all the events, times that $275 is what you'd expect to get paid for this. Again, at the end of the year, checks go out sometimes by us directly, sometimes through the original equipment manufacturer, depending on who they are. Some of them keep a small percentage because they have to run the program, and discharge in these batteries and send us the data so we can do the performance calculations. But that in general is how the kilowatts and kilowatt hours work. So in general, let's say you have a 15 kilowatt hour battery and we have a 3-hour event, you should be in the ballpark of 5 kilowatts on average discharge. Keep in mind that a lot of these battery manufacturers, they require a minimum amount of charge to stay in the battery. Like any battery, if you drain it down to 0 repeatedly, your iPhone, for instance, it's not good for it. So the manufacturers like to keep typically 20% charge in the battery and then keep charging it from there. So how does demand response help manage the peak? And we're actually getting close to the end here, and then we'll hopefully have a good discussion. This is more a commercial customer, but if you can imagine how much energy your home is using, let's say that's the red line, you're using that much energy during a day. And normally what you use during that type of day is the blue line. We're going to hit the event where we call our event and we're asking these batteries to discharge their energy. So as far as your electric meter goes, it may be supplying energy to your house. We call the event, the battery discharges. Well, the meter is now not seeing much of any electricity going into the house anymore. You're using the energy in your battery, so you're not bringing it from the grid through your meter into your house. And the same applies for small businesses, large commercial sites. When we ask them to curtail, they do certain actions. They stop things, slow things down, discharge a battery, change set points on their HVAC system, whatever they can do. And that's this level of curtailment that we calculate and pay them for that effort. And so everything they take off the grid, more than what they might normally use, is what they get paid. And that's how we can sum that up and take 185 megawatts off the grid during these events. So how much is 185 megawatts? This is a graph from the actual ISO New England page. Again, ISO New England runs our grid, and there are many of these ISOs throughout the country. This was the peak day, which was September 7th, this past year. And so I ran the graph and I blew it up. You can see the bubble is blown up to the right here. So we had 2 different types of events that day. Some of our events were 3 hours that started at 4 p.m. Some of the events were 2 hours that started at 5 p.m. Now, every day in the summer, I'm getting together with my counterparts from National Grid, from Cape Light Compact, from Unitel, to look at forecasts, look at weather, determine when these events are going to be. Do I need to call an event tomorrow? Typically give 24-hour notice so that you know an event is coming, and then these events take effect more or less automatically by the vendors. So we get together, we call these events. Sometimes if it's a very peaky day where I can kind of identify when the hour is that this peak is going to be, I'll run a 2-hour event. And you can actually see here in the middle of this blue line, this blue shade up here, you can see the peak was pretty clear right in the middle of that event. And some of them by program rules are 3-hour events. So the thermostat events would have started at 4 o'clock. The battery events would have started at 5 and run through 7. And if you look at the graph, the pullout on the right here, you can actually see where the orange is the actual, the blue is their forecast. You can see a drop in the entire ISO New England grid when that 4 o'clock event happens, and then a second drop when the 5 o'clock event happens. And so this red line is really an extrapolation with parallel lines to that usage about where I estimated it would have been. But as we work with the different utilities, not only is Eversource taking about 185 megawatts off the grid between Rhode Island, Connecticut, New Hampshire, we actually estimate about 400 megawatts come off the grid when we get together as a group of program administrators, call these events. We each run our connected solutions programs or whatever programs we have to take noticeable amounts of energy off the grid. And again, as you can actually see the drops on the entire ISO New England grid. So we find that pretty rewarding to be able to make that kind of change. And you know, that 185 megawatts means they can plan on that in the future as far as what they need to build. Dirty power plants, coal-fired power plants don't need to be used because you've taken that load off the grid rather than turning those power plants off. And so that's the Connected Solutions Program through Mass Save. That's the end of the presentation. And I'm available, you know, questions. I think, Scott, I'm not sure, or Colette, you were going to kind of take us through some of those questions. So let's see if we have any questions, and I'm happy to answer anything I can, and we'll go from there.
That sounds great. I think what we want to do is go to a few questions that have been asked before. Bill, if you'd stop your share. Okay, and I will share, I'm going to share the screen and go to a few questions that have been asked of me before. Is that coming up?
Yep.
Yep. You might want to zoom in a little bit if you can, Scott.
There we go. Can you all see that? So these are some
What's good?
questions who were just raised over time, and you know, how long are batteries expected to last? A lot of them have really good warranties. It's generally thought to be at least 10 years. There's some degradation expected in over that period of years, but it's very similar and so forth.
I think that's pretty accurate, Scott. Our program in Connecticut, sorry, I didn't let you finish there. We actually stipulate that any battery vendors in the program have to have at least a 10-year warranty because it is a 10-year program down there. So I think 10 years plus is certainly the expectation.
And you're pretty cautious about which battery companies are allowed to be in the program, correct?
Well, in Massachusetts, really a bring your own device. The manufacturer has to be integrated to our platform so we can get the data and launch the events. In Connecticut, where we provide some upfront incentives, it's a little bit more stringent. We're looking at UL listings and stuff like that to make sure, you know, since we're actually paying for some of the install, we play a bigger role in making sure that it meets all the codes and UL listings and such. But basically, any battery that gets installed has to go through our interconnection process and approved there to make sure that, if you can imagine, you know, there's poles and wires down your street, and there might be a transformer at the end of your street feeding power to all the houses in your neighborhood. Well, if you all of a sudden you're adding power to that circuit from your home, you have to make sure those wires and that transformer can handle that. So you go through our interconnection group, which any of your installers, any company installing a battery would be familiar with that. They would work with the interconnection group to make sure that, yes, at Bill's house, if Bill's going to discharge 10 kilowatts onto this local circuit, that it's not going to present any problems.
Sounds great. Another question was, are there different differences in the types of batteries? And I think the question there was really related to chemistry. And you know, I can look at, you know, my own my current house has Tesla batteries, which are lithium ion, and those are the ones that have gotten a little bit of I would say a little bit of bad press, but not really that much when you consider there've been very few incidents. But the current, you know, we went with a new with another brand, Enphase, for the new house, and it's lithium iron phosphate, which is much less prone to having events in terms of fire and things like that. Anything to add to that, Bill? Anything you've seen? Have you seen more of one type or another at this point?
No, nothing really jumps out. Basically, as long as the vendor can communicate with the battery and the battery itself can get through our interconnection process, then they'd be good to go.
Yep. Battery location is another question that's changed in the past couple of years from the fire code. And it seems the fire code is a little bit usually behind the chemistry. So the chemistry has moved ahead, and the lithium iron phosphate answers a lot of the problems of lithium ion. But the fire code in most places does not want you to have the batteries in your basement now in living space. And they prefer in garage and outdoor buildings. Obviously, outdoor buildings are tough in this climate. because they should be protected for some kind of conditioned space to have them at least not really cold or really, really hot. But I think that we're going to see changes in that in the next few years, the way battery technology goes and the codes go as well.
My understanding, Scott, is that some of the local like fire codes and such require, excuse me, kind of a fire rated room for the battery, which might need like a double layer of sheetrock kind of thing in its own space. But that you'd have to work with your local electrical department for permits and such as required.
Yep, and I found that the local fire department's absolutely wonderful, was not totally thrilled with the idea of putting them downstairs, even if we did all those wonderful things of double sheetrock and so forth. They wanted them out of the basement. I think it's, again, people are not, there's a lot of concern over things that are new and they haven't seen a lot so far. One of the questions that was asked also of the basically the different manufacturers, are the prices the same? So Bill talked about the 275 per kilowatt average kilowatt over the program period, and it is the same except for the fact that some of them charge a fee. So I found that, not to go by brands, but the higher brand that I used charged a 20% fee for managing that battery every year. So I got 80 cents on the dollar and it's several $1,000s. And the current manufacturer that I chose for the new house in Lincoln does not charge a fee, and the money comes directly from Eversource as a payment, as opposed to coming through that battery manufacturer. And Tim asked the question of how you calculate the number. Well, the way I've done it, for example, let's take a single Tesla battery is 13.5 kilowatt hours. Where they like to say keep it at 80, keep it at minimum level of 20%, which means you have 10.8 kilowatt hours that are available to Eversource for an event, and divide by 3 hours and multiply by 275, you've got $963 a year roughly that you would get, and in the case of Tesla, you'd take 20% off of that. But the thing that's, I think, is rewarding is also that you all have the battery companies and Eversource have made some changes where originally they would not charge from the grid, or at least Tesla wouldn't allow it. They are now, so that the advantage is you can go into tomorrow's event with a full battery. If you've had a full event that took it down to 20% today, and tomorrow is a cloudy day, the battery can be back charged before the event tomorrow. So you're getting full value and so forth from that event. Because I think these incentives do make a difference in reducing the cost overall and reducing the payback period for a lot of people. And I think that's an important element.
Absolutely. If you look at, let's say you're averaging, and again, if you had about 10 kilowatts available, 3-hour event, you might have 3.5 kW. But if we run 2-hour events, those days would give you more like 5 kW. Well, let's say you average 4 times 275, you're talking ballpark $1,200, and that's every year. So it's a good amount. Over a 10-year period, it can be a good amount of that purchase price for the battery. And again, you're typically charging it for free from your solar. I think I did a calculation once. Even if you didn't have solar and you charged it from the grid, I calculated an average of about $150 to charge it to get about that $1,000 worth of revenue. Should you be charging it from the grid without solar? Just as an FYI, a little case.
I have a friend who's actually doing that now with a battery that they put in. They don't have the exposure to do solar, but they put in the batteries, believing that it gives them the backup that they want when some of those trees have problems also.
Yep.
And my own experience also is I received a much larger amount this past year when the battery company had allowed the grid charging. It made a big difference. And one of the other questions that come up of how does the electric utility pay for the power that it takes from the batteries? That goes through your standard net metering process. So if the power goes out from the battery to the grid, you're compensated for it through net metering, and then you're recharging it in some way. So I've always looked at it and said it really doesn't matter whether I'm using my power, whether I have the settings set for using my own power and am completely energy independent, or whether it's being used by Eversource, it's going back and I'm using the same amount either way and distributing the difference. So it's irrelevant in that case. But we do get
Scott,
paid.
I was gonna say,
Sure.
don't quote me on this, but I believe the net metering only applies with if you have solar. That's kind of the driving force. If you got a battery without solar, I don't believe the net metering comes into play. Is that your experience, what you've heard?
I actually don't know the answer to that one because I've never not had solar on a,
And
with a battery.
and again, 99% of the people with batteries
Yeah.
do have solar, but if that's a question, you could get that answered.
Yep. We've already answered the question about will the batteries be recharged from the grid, from the solar, and I think that's a huge element. And we're going to get into time of use at some point. Would you agree with that, Bill?
It wouldn't surprise me. I don't see anything on the immediate roadmap, but that would make sense.
That's after they put all new meters on that are that's $1 billion there.
Yeah.
The IRS tax credits right now are 30% for the installation of batteries you get as a credit, which is a great thing, whether it's tied to solar or it's not tied to solar under the current bill. That was a new thing added. And the batteries are also part of the mass heat loan program so that you can get a 0% loan from one of the banks that's part of that program. And I think I can't recall whether it's a 7-year or a 10-year payback, but it's an extended payback period for it. And then one of my favorite questions that I keep nudging Bill on is, will my EV be able to be used in conjunction with a connected solutions demand response program? In my case, I've got a 131 kilowatt hour battery in a vehicle, and that would be an ideal thing as opposed to my 40 kilowatt hours of other batteries to have basically go back into this program and refill it at night. So I'm looking forward to that being a reality. And Bill's comment is not now, right?
Right. I mean, vehicle to grid is how we refer to it, V2G, the vehicle to grid. When one of my counterparts refers to it as a battery on wheels, basically the same thing. I don't think there are a whole lot of chargers that can behave that way to actually take it in. So there are issues there, but we're working on it. You know, those discussions are certainly being had. And there's certain pilot programs and stuff, you know, that are being proposed to start to bring that more into the mix. Absolutely. I
Duke
would
Power
definitely
is
look
doing
forward in the future.
Duke Power is doing a pilot with Lightnings. I don't know where it stands right now, but they've announced it, and it was very much a part of their process where they're seeding out a bunch of Ford F-150 Lightnings for that process. And the last question was, how long has the program been in place, and is there a commitment to continue it? Bill, do you want to take that?
Yeah, so I think it started in 2019, so about 5 years in right now. We just, as Eversource and all the program administrators, we present a 3-year plan, a 3-year energy efficiency plan. And we're in the last year of one right now. And our new plan for the next 3 years for 25, 26, and 27 absolutely includes this and keeps these demand response programs going for sure. So there's nothing in the works that I've heard anyone discuss about ending these programs. I would be very surprised if not only are they approved for the next plan, but the next plan after that and continuing so on. You know, the one thing I will say is when I talk to my management, the question is more around how do we grow the demand response program 5 times the size it is right now? So there's nothing really being discussed other than massive growth of the programs.
I love to hear that because, you know, as I was going through and writing up some of the things and sending them out for this event, you know, one of the things that I feel very strongly about is the opportunity that, you know, the batteries have provided battery backup. And I've had the experience of, I grew up in an area where trees fell a lot and we lost power, and been through the idea of losing power for a couple of days. So I believe in it for the backup. I believe in it for the energy independence that you get out of, you know, time of day, but also for the helping of the grid, which, you know, you're being compensated for that with the tax credits and the incentives and so forth. And the idea that the electrons go to the closest location, so it's very beneficial. But it also helps to reduce the need for peaker plants. And I love those curves that Bill showed and if it did get to 5 times the size of that, they might be able to retire some of those peaker plants and not have to have them, and they're all fossil fuel based and not very clean and efficient. So I think that'd be wonderful. There are a bunch of chat questions, so I'm going to stop my share here and go to those questions if I can find them. There we are. Give me 2 seconds here because we need to look at them. Tim, we answered your question. Did you get satisfaction on that question, or do you want any more information on it?
No, that's great. Thanks very much.
Okay. Anne asked the question, event is when this technique is invoked. Yes, I think Bill referred to it. An event is when Bill and his colleagues call it and say that there's going to be an exceptional demand on typically a very hot day, and air conditioning is going to be important. And that would be what they call it, and whether it's a 2 or 3 hour or whatever they say within that 3 hour period. It's 2 to 8 p.m., correct, Bill? This year?
Yes, well, 3 to 8 technically, but we haven't called one before 4 p.m. in a long time. So typically they're either going to be 4 to 7 or 5 to 8 in that ballpark.
And for most of
Because
you,
it's funny when you just make a point. When you look at that ISO New England graph, one of the things you can bring up there is an estimated solar load. So you can see a huge solar load, and with all the additional solar over the past number of years, the peak has shifted a little bit later in the day, which makes sense with that solar load.
And as a matter of fact, when we were building the new house, one of the plans we did was we put part of the array due south, but we due to roof space, we also put an array on due west. And it's been fascinating to see that it's only producing 10% less than the south array, and that provides for that extra later in the afternoon, which the Eversource folks told me they really appreciate.
Interesting.
And it's also wonderful to be able to watch the apps from whether it's been the Tesla or the Enphase app. I'm sure all the others do it as well. You can see exactly how the battery is performing and when it's being pulled energy being pulled out and so forth. Find that the grid in the neighborhood needs updating before they can get grid connected batteries. This gets very expensive for the homeowner, sometimes 10 kW, 10K. Is there any process to connected solutions to help customers with those costs? Bill, this is where I think if you look at the load on the grid for a particular location, is it more batteries or solar itself that it can't handle?
Well, I think it's just I think you're talking about, the load and the interconnection process. It's just whether it's solar or coming from a battery, whatever it is, it's that load going out to the local circuit. And they need to make sure the local circuit. So if interconnection has to upgrade a transformer into your neighborhood to be able to handle that load, that typically is going to have to be paid for by the homeowner. It's my understanding.
I had the surprise because one of the problems you will face is as we had to go 400 amps at the moment because of an all electric house. And that's what they insisted upon. I hope with the load management, that'll be something in the future. People will get down to back to 200 amps. It meant we had to put our own transformer in, and that was a pricey thing. It wasn't awful. It was notable. And I drove right to Eversource's headquarters when I got the bill and dropped them a check so that I got it moving along in the process. Anna asked a question about how the rate is set for connected solutions, the 275. Now, it's very different in Connecticut. Is it Connecticut 400?
No, I think Rhode Island might be 400.
I'm sorry, Rhode Island. Yeah. But different programs. So how is it set? Is that set with the DOER or DPU or?
Well, typically the numbers are set by what we call a benefit cost ratio. And it has to be above 1, that ratio, which means the benefit to the ratepayers has to be more than the cost of the program. Makes sense. Benefit cost ratio. We don't want to do something that costs ratepayers money. We want to do something that in the long run saves ratepayers money. And there are benefits to the transmission side, the distribution side. There's a lot of other benefits that I don't even get into that level of detail myself personally, but that can drive what that number is. So for that number to stay above 1 is going to kind of put the range of what that incentive could be in the mix there. Now, when we first started the program, we were paying $225 in the summer and $50 for a winter program. But a couple years into it, we determined that, well, there is no winter peak. So there really were no benefits in the winter. So we took that $50 and added it to the summer program. But it's all about us when we file these 3-year plans. Everything we do across the board for energy efficiency has to have these benefit cost ratios to show that this program is an overall benefit to our customers and ratepayers.
Bill, are you including avoided capital cost or delayed capital cost in that, or just operating?
Explain what you mean there a little bit more, if you could, whoever asked that question.
You avoid some capital cost if of upgrading the grid if you have more distributed generation and
from our level.
Yeah.
From the Eversource.
Yeah.
I don't really have a good answer for that. I'm everything we do is both short-term 3-year plans and long-term. How do we do our grid modernization, for the year 2050 and whatever level of carbon reduction you're shooting for? So it's very complex, and I really can't speak to the details of it.
That was a wonky question. Then the other component of that is one of the things I feel very strongly about is that I presume from our conversations, you're in line with the belief that this does affect ratepayers in a positive way. If we could retire some of those old peaker plants, that eventually, because it is better than a one, you would affect ratepayers down the road with more batteries.
Absolutely, and in working with the regulators, everything, all these different benefits that we claim are approved by the regulators. This is all regulated. And these benefit cost ratio analyses get submitted to them for them to review, just to make sure that they can see that there is an overall net benefit to the customer as opposed to a net loss to the customer. Now, that being said, as we do a pilot, let's say we're going to pilot your Ford Lightning as a vehicle to grid type of thing. We might start a pilot program that maybe has a little less than a 1.0 benefits cost as we build the program. But there would have to be, the short term, after 2 years, it does become beneficial kind of thing. Because these programs are very complex and take a while to get rolling and to spin up. But in the long run, for anything to stay and to be, go from a pilot to a full-fledged program has to have those positive benefit cost ratios.
Sounds good. And ask for a reminder of the battery, the longevity of the battery. It's typically 10 plus years. The degradation, I think, if I look at my the warranties for mine, they've been typically, they can degrade down to, I think, 80% or something efficiency before it's really a warranty event. But that's not a bad set of numbers for 10 years. Andrew, you asked a question. Do you want to ask it yourself? I think that might be helpful because that's I think the way you phrase it would be helpful.
Well, I think I understand this, but it hasn't been stated explicitly anywhere that the batteries that are used for the demand response, are they the same batteries that we can install as a backup power source in the case of an outage instead of installing a generator? And so these batteries serve two purposes. They serve as emergency power when we need it and peak relief power when the grid needs it. Is that correct?
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think I saw a question. I'm going to expand on that a little bit in that when we get together with all the program administrators, when I get on the phone with National Grid every day in the summer to talk about the upcoming week, the next day, we do not call these events if large storms are coming. What we don't want to happen is call an event, use the power, now a storm hits and it can't recharge, and we put you behind the 8 ball. So we definitely don't want that. Now, we're not at the point very localized. Should there be a very localized thunderstorm comes through, there's always a chance of anybody losing power at any time. But if there's a large storm coming where we're going to go into what we call storm duty, everyone that works for Eversource has a storm duty role. When these storms come through, you hear about the tens of thousands of outages. We all have a role, whether it's getting hotels for the contractors or food for the contractors or a liaison to the town of Lincoln, talking to the police chief about emergencies. We all have our role to play in that. So if anything to that level of this, we call it ERP, emergency response preparedness. When the storm duty is going to happen, these large storms are coming, we will intentionally not call these events to make sure we don't go into that situation.
And that was in your slide deck, which is what led me to ask this question. I inferred it, but wanted to explicitly.
Very good.
And I've had lots of experience with Stormwatch, and it's very effective. And I find that it differs by battery manufacturer, though, at least with the two I have experience with. The Enphase kept it in Stormwatch recently during a flood event that never happened. But it was a longer period than Tesla did. But that was the experience where the batteries are charged to 100% and left there through that event. So if you have an outage, you have the backup you need. And one of the things that I find fascinating is load management for a house is getting to be a much bigger topic and much more important. We're testing that on the new house and doing a lot of things that will show us where on the granularity of the various different devices and so forth, what actually works well. And we're hoping to learn more as we go. But basically, we're trying to maximize the number of days of we have if there's a complete outage. Complete outage.
Let me elaborate on that a little bit. So, Scott uses the term storm guard. One vendor has a storm guard, another one has a storm watch, where those are actually programmed in by the manufacturer. Should there be a storm in your area, maybe even down to the zip code level, they will prevent any kind of a demand response event from happening if they themselves within their manufacturing group determine there's a storm. Now, we've been working with one of them. I noticed that last year in Connecticut, just kind of FYI, that a storm includes many, like this storm guard includes many things, including like excessive heat. Well, excessive heat is when we're going to have these events. So we have to work out some of those kinks. We don't want you to not charge because it's hot when we need you because it's hot, if you can imagine. But the storm guard, in addition to us not calling events on our own, if a storm is coming, these storm guard type of setups within the manufacturers also help prevent that situation.
And Andrew, the second part of your question was about 600 amp service. As I understand it, Bill, you're agnostic to past the meter. You're agnostic on the size of the service. That's more the solar array that you have and the interconnection of the way that solar array works and what the limitations are there. Am I correct?
That's right. I mean, we refer to this as a bring your own device behind the meter program. So if you whatever you can put in and it makes sense financially and you get it through interconnection, then that's fine by us.
And
we have limitations. We have limitations when it comes to commercial, but that's a different story about how big a battery.
The biggest limitation, Andrew, I found on that issue is the idea of the way your house itself is set up. If you have 3 200 amp services, or do you have, is that the way it's organized? How you set up for your what breakers you would have and what panels you would have effectively tied to the batteries. In my case, the Enphase is up to 52 panels. Solar panels will power the batteries. So we went through a whole exercise of trying to figure out which circuits should be backed up and tying them all to one panel and one set of one electrical panel and one set of 52 solar panels.
That's right. I recall looking at your videos. In your video, Scott, you had 2 large panels, and your battery only served one of them, right?
Yeah. So there's one backup electrical panel and one not backed up. And so we were very cautious about what we did for lighting and distribution and so forth for that.
Yeah, when we had a generator, we went through that same thing. But my question was because we have 600 amp service coming in from the street to the house, and I wasn't sure of that because that's not behind the meter, that's in front of the meter. That's between the street and the meter, and I didn't know if that's an issue.
Well, so as far as the battery goes, the battery has to be behind the meter, between the meter and your house.
Right.
So that's a matter of how your distribution is set up for your own panels. Do you have 3 200 amp services inside, or do you have?
No, they totally retrenched. It's just one big 600 amp huge thing coming in.
Okay.
And then it gets divided up once it's inside.
That's ours gets divided at 400 at the meter outside. So it gets divided into 2 200s coming in from 400 coming to the box.
It might be divided. Yeah, I'd have to look outside there. Anyway, I'm taking up too much bandwidth from.
No, but that's an important issue today because of, with a lot of houses that are taking more electricity. And a question from Rose. Rose, Rose, yes, peaker plants. I know that's your favorite topic, and you've inspired me with that whole question for the last year. So yes, retiring peaker plants saves everyone money and helps save the planet too. So thank you for all your efforts in trying to get. Rose is leading an effort to try and get National Grid, I think, doing a battery facility instead of a peaker plant out in the middle of the state. And I forget which town it's in.
Okay.
It's not from the utilities. It's actually the owner of the plant. It's owned by Cogentrix and it's in West Springfield. And they've shut down fossil fuel operations and they're about to go with solar and battery storage.
Nice.
And Rose has played a major role in that effort. So thank you.
Yep, and they closed 2 small peakers in Berkshire County that were running on kerosene. They were 50 and 60 years old, respectively.
Roy, you have a question?
I was just gonna make a quick comment on
Yes.
batteries. I'll let you go in 1 second. That Eversource has put a large battery down in Provincetown, which is pretty interesting. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but apparently there's only one distribution leg up what is the forearm of the Cape, from Chatham up. So should something happen there, there could be a world of hurt. So right at in Provincetown, they put a large, I think it's somewhere about 40 megawatt hours worth of batteries, a huge site for that tip of the Cape, which is pretty interesting. I was talking to one of our employees that lives in Provincetown, and he said, well, one difference you can see is, they used to have to like reset all the clocks in the house like every month or so, and he hasn't had to do it in like the last year because it always, he's not losing that little blip where he's making all his clocks go dark. So it's kind of interesting.
Can you make that happen in the Berkshires too? Roy, you have a question? Yeah, Roy Harvey, you had a question?
Yes, just wondering how this, how you bucketize all the different programs you have. So Bill, you mentioned the figure, I think it was 185 megawatts of demand reduction. Yep. It wasn't clear if that was just for batteries or if that also included the thermostats.
No, so that's everything. We have about 30 megawatts worth of thermostat reduction. We have about a little over 100 megawatts, 120 or so megawatts of commercial, which are large companies, large sites that either, change their set points, slow down their fans, or maybe even have an operation that they move to the next day or shift kind of thing. So it's across both commercial and industrial and residential across the board. There's some commercial batteries that are quite large, half a megawatt or more. But that's the total across all of our different programs.
The residential and commercial and thermostats.
And then the thermostats and then the residential batteries. Yeah.
And as I recall, Connected Solutions also had a way to control your EV charger. Is that still part of Connected Solutions?
Not right now. Those are changing. We had we did have an EV program. It's moving more to a managed charging approach rather than just plug in. And so we actually don't have one right now, but I'm pretty sure we're writing one into our next plan. Because that's obviously a big, huge step. My manager kind of runs our EV side of the house. If you think about this demand response approach, it's not quite as simple to say stop charging your car, because you need that available. So with both the chargers and what they call telematics, which allows us to actually connect to the logic within your car, we can actually manage when it's charged. So you could sign up for a program that would do something like, I'm going to come home, I'm going to plug my car in, and I'm part of this program that says, I want my car charged to 80% at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then the program will charge it when available at the right time to get it there. So it's more of a managed charging than a demand response approach. And that seems to be the way the EV piece of it is going.
Right. So you mentioned that'll be the next part of the program. Is it the next phase of Mass Save from 2025 to 2027?
I believe there's something being built into that, into the next 3-year plan, but I don't have the details of that.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, then my last question was, how does this appear in ISO New England's accounting? Do these programs roll up under active demand response, or is it active demand capacity resource, or what?
I believe it's active demand response should be the heading on.
Okay.
Within the energy efficiency grouping.
Got it. Right. Thanks very much. Appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Diana had a question about the location of the battery. Diana, can you give us a little more from what was discussed before? What are you looking at for more in particular?
Mute. There we go.
There you are. We hear you.
Well, if it's not practical to locate the battery in your garage or your basement, where do you put it? How does it work?
Bill,
You
do
might
want
have better information. I don't really have much information on that. You might have better with your experience, Scott.
I think the answer is that right now, the best thing to do is talk to Brian Young if you had a question, because he's gotten up to speed on that, the fire chief. I think they really are the driver for that whole component of it. I think that, if your garage is partially heated, or you can segregate an area which you can have some insulation, you can, address that. I don't think there's a perfect answer at this point in time for that.
You can start, your installer should have, the local building codes and what the electrical inspector is going to be looking for, and kind of plan accordingly. And then you could also probably reach out to the electrical inspector about, that high level question. They might have some regulations that they're, enforcing about where that goes.
Yeah, I was actually at an event yesterday where I asked the question about a couple things on batteries, and was surprised by installers who I didn't know well, who had very little exposure to the issue and understanding of what the components are for where it should go, and what the limitations should be. So I think I think a lot of this is changing over time. I think the answer is just being pragmatic and checking out before you go with the installer, the electrical inspector, and the fire department. The fire department, I think, drives it more than I think electrical just cares about the fact it is done properly. Fire will care about making sure that it's in a safe location. And as well, the building inspector will also say that it's got to be high enough that you won't drive your car into it, or you'll have to put bollards up, which that was the new thing. I may have to put bollards up. So,
oh, interesting. Makes sense.
Yeah. Is there a Ann asked, is there a website where all this is laid out? Connected Solutions has a great website, but it's not, the detail isn't there, is it?
Well, are we talking about Connected Solutions, or are we still talking about like the battery installation component of it?
And what did you mean there? Which part of it did you want laid out?
Well, I'm new to all of this. What size battery do I need? What's in it for the participant, that they get these up to maybe $1,000 in a year? Is it out of the goodness of your heart that you participate in this, so that the electric companies don't have to build more whatevers? I mean, that kind of question, kind of the framework of the whole thing.
Well, as a finance person, I would look at it and say, out of the goodness of my heart, it's, in my own case, it's much more a pragmatic answer that I wanted backup. I look at it and say it's economically viable on the return on investment. I think it makes sense in the terms of the payback period. So that I think that the societal benefits for the environment and for getting power back to the grid are wonderful elements of it, but I don't think it would work if it was not financially viable for people, for the vast majority of people. Would you agree, Bill?
I'd agree. And how much is the battery backup worth? How often do you lose power? When I refer to what I call our storm duty, most of the outages are caused by trees going down on power lines. Well, do you live in an area that has a lot of trees on power lines? Are you in a neighborhood that really there are no trees to fall on the power lines? You might be much less likely to lose power. So if I was going to think about a battery, first I'd probably think about how often do I actually lose power, and for how long. And then there's the climate impact, the carbon reduction impact of that also. And then start looking at the finances. If you have solar, does it make sense if I can get some tax advantages like Scott spoke to? If I can get this performance incentive on the battery discharging, does it now make my financial decision easy to get that backup resiliency? Obviously, it doesn't really help you specifically, other than the revenue, having the battery until you need it for backup. So it's how important are all those things, and then you'd make your decision from there.
In my case, my house was built in 1968. The electricity comes in underground on one side of the house, and the person I bought the house from had thought he would get a generator, and the whatever you call that box that does whatever it does with the electricity from the generator that feeds it into your that box that's got the fuses in it. Is on the other side of the house, and I have two electric accounts, one for the house and one for the a little apartment in my garage. So, and that's where my car is plugged in, my electric car, and I have solar panels. So, and the solar panels are connected to all the machinery that's on the side of the house where the electricity comes, so that the logistics of the whole thing are incredibly difficult. Is there
I can see that.
Is there anybody you can recommend who can deal with these things? Is it just a matter of I didn't even mention the fact that it's a slab house. It's got no basement, it's got no attic. It's got a lot of benefits. It's not sounding that great in my telling right now, but I can't see how to deal with these things.
I mean, all those, anything can almost be solved with a cost, right, Scott? And so what you might do is, you know, and Scott, I'm sure you'd be happy to make a recommendation of an installer. And, you know, what your recommendation on some of these products, we don't recommend specific products. We have to stay agnostic to that. But then if you got an installer that could come in and kind of look at the place and come up with a scenario and come up with an estimate for the wiring. It's because it's not just the battery itself, it's installing it, it's the wiring, getting it across the entire house, how it all connects up together. You know, and you know, typically I think they'd be pretty happy to come out and give a proposal on what the cost might be, and then you could start your analysis to see if it made sense to do.
I assume there's no tax benefits for those costs.
Well, there are, because the reality is it's the combined, it's not just the battery, it's the installation of the battery that you get the 30% on. So I'll be glad to talk to you offline if you'd like about any suggestions.
That'd be great. Thank you.
You know, one of the other elements for people who are part of the SMART program is there's a SMART adder for battery, the SMART solar program, which is the incentive program in Massachusetts that's been in place for, I think, since 2020. It replaced the SREC program, and there's a battery adder. And I think on the batteries, I'm just going through the battery adder right now, and I think I'm getting 3 point some cents per kilowatt hour generated from the solar because we have batteries. And that's another major incentive for putting in batteries, because that will pay a nice chunk of it.
I mean, that's probably pushing 15% or so.
Yeah, I forget what the exact percent, but it's pretty significant. It's pretty significant.
Yeah.
Plus, when you're talking about the 0% heat loan makes it, you know, I would say cash flow neutral is what I would call it at this point in time, up to a certain point. And I think I look at it as saying my calculations show that it's long-term cash flow positive to have the batteries and a very positive return on investment. Rose asked the question about what if you don't have a garage? That's a darn good question. One that I don't have an answer for. And Bill, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't. It'd really be, again, what's the requirement by the fire department and building, you know, electrical inspector, and where could it go with whatever your situation was?
Rose, do you want to come on and talk about that? The question you're asking, or your comment you're making about the peaker plant and the winter program?
Yeah, it was not a peaker plant, but it was a pilot program on demand response, very similar to Connected Solutions. Was conducted out in Washington State in Snohomish County, and they ran a couple of different scenarios. And the one that had total control like you were talking about, where you can really get in there and control what each appliance is doing, exactly when you're charging your car. It shaved 30% off of winter peak demand. So that really avoided all the peaker plants in the area needing to come on. It was really astonishing how much power it saved.
Nice. And again, the peaker plants I would think are mostly summer because we are summer peaking here. But the push again is for electrification and heat pumps, et cetera. Less fossil fuel, more electricity across the board. So I do expect within probably 5 to 10 years, we probably could very well be winter peaking.
Yep, and it was that total control of the thermostat where there were smart meters and you could really get in and control all the appliances necessary from the utility side, that they saved 30% of power. And that's what we're looking towards as we electrify things, is it's going to turn more to a winter peak.
Well, I was looking
And
at Scott's house, and he has every outlet, every light switch is programmable and such. And most of us aren't going to have that. But, Scott did it to the extreme, which is awesome.
Well, we did it as a test. We did it as a test because we don't know what the granularity should be. And the answer is, the only way to figure out is you have circuit level control up here, and then we did it way down at the very deep level. And somewhere in the middle is the right answer, but we overdid it. I think that one of the things we're also going to see is on that winter program comment from Rose. I think we're going to see some big changes, and I don't know if what your planning is for 2030 and 2050. Is there more heat pumps and more people are using having electrification for their purpose of heating? That may change some of your demand on cold periods and so forth.
Absolutely, that's the game plan. Yeah, the heat pumps will add all that, take all the heat, which is mostly fossil fuel right now, and make it electric as all these heat pumps come into play.
Thanks to Tim. Also, Tim put up a connection, the battery storage link to the program and so forth, and some of the incentives on there. And I think if there are other follow-up questions, if for those of you have my email, you saw it. So send me an email if you have any questions. I know Bill will be willing to help out with questions. I bug Bill every so often, and I thank you for that, Bill. You've been a huge help. And
you're welcome.
For your program, and thank you for what you're doing.
You're welcome. It's exciting, when I can actually see the dip in the ice-inflating grid for what we do, it makes it be very rewarding. It's a lot of fun.
And I just got asked by Andrew, my email is, I just put it in there, but it's slrodman@8500.org. So I thank you all for all your time tonight and coming on, and great thanks to you, Bill. Colette, any follow-up?
You're welcome, Scott.
No, I really enjoyed the program. Bill, thank you very much for joining us this evening.
It was great to meet you, Colette, and thank you everybody for joining.
And remember that this has been recorded and it's posted on the Lincoln greenenergyweb.org website.
Great. And Scott, maybe if you wouldn't mind sending me a link to it.
Absolutely.
So I can find it easy. Have I send it off to my team.
Absolutely.
Thanks, everybody.
I think the way it's normally done, Belinda Gingrich does it normally. She's traveling, so I got the role of recording tonight. But when she gets back, it'll go up. I think it'll go up in the next couple of days, and it'll also be on YouTube.
Excellent.
All right.
Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you all, and have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.